The morning they found Ida Sparks's car, the fog hadn't lifted yet. It sat at the entrance to Bone Holler, like something that had been placed there deliberately. A 1948 Ford, dark green, driver's door, hanging open at a 90-degree angle, the engine ticking over steady as a heartbeat. Her purse was on the passenger seat. A half-eaten tomato sandwich on the dash. Wax paper folded back neat, like she'd set it down, meaning to come right back. The fog moved through the open door and came out the other side. Earl Combs, who ran the post route through McDowell County 3 mornings a week, saw it first. He pulled his truck alongside, leaned out the window, listened to the Ford's engine. He didn't call out. He said later that he didn't call out because something about the silence under the engine noise made him not want to make a sound. He sat there for 4 minutes by his watch. Then he drove to Welch and used a phone. The search party entered the hollow at dawn on November 14th, 1951. 7 men with flashlights, even though it was daylight, because the hollow swallowed light in a way that the surrounding hills didn't, and everyone who grew up near McDowell County knew it. They walked the single dirt road. They checked all 11 houses. They checked the church, the one-room school, the creek bank, where children sometimes played. They hollered her name, Sparks, Miss Sparks, Ida, and the hollow gave them the sound back wrong, the echo arriving before it should, from directions that didn't match. She wasn't there. They looked for 3 days. On the 3rd morning, a man named Hobie Rakes found her 2 miles past where the road ended, in a part of the hollow, where there was no trail, no clearing, no reason a person would be. She was sitting upright against a sourwood tree, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a bus. Bobbed hair. Her shoes were clean, not a scratch on her. She was looking at something in the middle distance that wasn't there. Hobie said her name. She turned to look at him. Her eyes focused slowly, the way eyes do when someone's been asleep for a long time. "Where am I?" she said. He told her. She looked around at the trees, at the ridge above, at the pale November sky. She swallowed. Then she said the only other thing she would say for the rest of that day, and the only thing she would ever say in public about those 72 hours, the single sentence that made it into the McDowell County Recorder and 3 other papers before editors decided there wasn't enough context to make it make sense. The road kept going, she said. It just kept going. I need to tell you about the road. Because that's what this is about, really. Not the woman in the car, not the search party, not even the hollow itself in the way you might be imagining it. It's about a road that goes in and doesn't go out the same way, and about the people who figured that out before anyone wrote it down, and about the long chain of decisions, small and large, that turned that knowledge into a rule, and the rule into a silence, and the silence into the kind of thing that gets a town labeled backward by people who've never had to build their lives around something they can't explain. Bone Holler, McDowell County, West Virginia. The name appears in records as early as 1861, when a county surveyor wrote in his notes that a local hollow was called so because of the animal bones that accumulated near a natural salt lick at the hollow's center. He spelled it Bone Holler and moved on. It was not a place of particular interest. A dead-end hollow, mountains pressing in on 3 sides, a single road cut through the only gap, a creek running the length of it. By 1936, 11 families lived there, a church, a school, a life that looked from the outside like hardship and from the inside like home. The surveyor's explanation for the name is probably accurate as far as it goes. Salt licks do attract animals. Animals do leave bones. The geology of that part of McDowell County includes a mineral seam that surfaces in several places, and a hollow positioned the way Bone Holler is positioned, sheltered on three sides with a creek carrying minerals down from the ridge, would concentrate salts in a way that deer and elk and bear would find irresistible. You can explain the name in 8 sentences and feel satisfied. The other explanation takes longer, and it doesn't satisfy anything. Rena Justice came to Bone Holler in September of 1936 on a Wednesday, which she noted in her journal because she had a habit of noting things, a habit that had made her the top student at Concord College and the youngest school teacher certified in Mercer County, which was where she was from. Though she'd taken the position in McDowell because the pay was marginally better and because she was 24 years old and she believed the way 24-year-olds with good grades sometimes do, that she was prepared for most things. She was not prepared for the road. Not because of anything that happened on the road. The drive-in was unremarkable. 30 minutes from Welch on a dirt track that switchbacked up a ridge and dropped into the hollow on the other side. The kind of road a Ford could manage if you kept your speed honest. She was not prepared for the road because nobody had told her before she arrived that there was only one of it. One road in. Same road out. Mountains on the other 3 sides. Not gentle slopes you could scramble up if you needed to, but the hard Appalachian kind, sandstone and shale and scrub oak, rising at angles that would break an ankle on a dry day. If you needed to leave Bone Holler, you used the road. There was no other option. She pulled up to the house that had been arranged for her. The Dillard place, 2 rooms, a porch, a well 20 feet from the door. On a Wednesday afternoon in September, and the first person she met was Cleet Maynard. He was standing at his fence line, which was adjacent to the Dillard property, watching her unload boxes from the truck bed. He was a large man going to lean, somewhere in his early 50s, with a face that had been weathered past the point where weathering does any more damage, and he walked with a tilt that you noticed immediately, a permanent lean to the right, one leg shorter than the other by what a doctor would have measured as roughly 1.5 inches. The consequence of a roof collapse in a shaft mine 12 years prior that had broken his leg in 3 places and set it imperfectly. He didn't use a cane. He walked like the tilt was architectural, like he'd been built that way on purpose. He watched her carry 3 boxes before he spoke. "You the new school teacher?" "I am," Rena said. She set a box on the porch rail and pushed her glasses up. She used her middle finger for this without thinking about it, a habit she'd had since she was 8. Rena Justice. From Welch most recently. Cleet Maynard. He didn't offer a hand. Not unfriendly, just a man who'd assessed the distance between them and found extending a hand across it impractical. "You got everything you need in the house?" "I expect so. I haven't been inside yet." "Well." He looked at the sky. The sun was behind the western ridge, and the hollow was already in shadow, even though by a clock it was only 4 in the afternoon. The shadow came early here. The mountains were close enough that they ate the last 2 hours of direct light. "You'll want to get settled before dark." "I'll manage," she said. He looked at her. "I don't doubt it," he said. "I'm saying settle before dark. Not settle quick. Settle before dark." Rena Justice had a polite smile she used for moments like this, a smile that was technically pleasant and actually communicating nothing at all. She deployed it now. "Thank you, Mr. Maynard." He nodded. He looked at the road, the single road running the length of the hollow toward the gap in the mountains, and then he looked back at her. "The road changes after dark," he said. "You walk out on it, you'll end up deeper in. I know how that sounds. Think whatever you like about it. Just don't walk that road once it's fully dark. I'll keep that in mind." "That ain't what I'm asking you to keep," he said. "I'm asking you to keep your feet inside." He went back to whatever he'd been doing on his side of the fence. Rena carried the rest of her boxes inside. She lit the lamp at 7 o'clock. Outside, the hollow had gone fully dark, the kind of dark that cities never reach, a comprehensive dark that pressed against the window glass. She'd brought 4 books, a journal, a hand mirror, and a hot plate, and she arranged them in a way that made the 2 rooms feel inhabited. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the table by the window and graded the intake assessments she'd given her 6 students that afternoon. 3 Maynards, 2 Vances, 1 Combs, and thought about what Cleet had said. The road changes after dark. She looked up from her papers. The window showed her the road, pale in the darkness, running away from the house toward the hollow's entrance. She could see by the thin wash of starlight the fence post at the Maynard property line, could see the shape of the large oak that stood about 100 feet up the road to the right. Or it had been 100 feet this afternoon when she'd walked it. She put her pencil down. The oak was closer, not by much. Maybe she'd misjudged the distance in the afternoon. Maybe the darkness was compressing her sense of scale. She stared at it. The oak sat in the dark and was 30 feet away from her window instead of 100, or something near 30. And she sat with that for a long moment, telling herself that distances in darkness are unreliable, which is true. That the mind fills in uncertain space with guesses, also true. She looked away, graded 2 more papers, looked up again. The oak was further now, much further, not 100 feet, further than 100 feet, pushed back into the dark, further than she could confidently say, further than the space between her window and the road's first bend should allow. She took her glasses off, cleaned them on her sleeve, put them back on. The oak was gone, not hidden in shadow. There was no oak-shaped shadow either, just the road, and the dark on either side. And the distance is feeling like a room where someone has rearranged the furniture while you weren't looking. She sat very still. She heard the creek running, which was closer than the creek should have been. She heard something from further in the hollow, a sound she could not identify, low, rhythmic, like a groan or like wind through a particular shape of rock, arriving at her window before it should have, as though the sound had started from 20 feet away, rather than wherever it actually originated. She went to bed at 9 o'clock, which was earlier than usual, and she lay awake for a long time listening to the creek run. She told herself, distances in darkness are unreliable. The mind fills in uncertain space with guesses. She didn't say anything to Cleet about it in the morning. Opal Vance introduced herself the following Saturday, which was the day of the Hollow's periodic gathering at the church. Not a formal service, just a congregation of the 11 households, for reasons that combined social and practical in the way that rural isolation tends to blend them. Canning knowledge shared, tools lent, children compared, coffee made in a pot that held 14 cups and went around 3 times. Opal came through the door already laughing at something her sister had said. the gap in her front teeth catching the morning light, and she made a direct line for Rena before Rena had finished half her first cup. "You're the new teacher," Opal said. "Good. The last one lasted 4 months, and the one before her lasted 2. You got a look about you like you might last longer." "What kind of look is that?" Rena asked. "Stubborn," Opal said without apology. "Sit with me. I made stack cake, and I want someone to tell me if the cardamom's too much." It was not too much. It was perfect. 8 thin layers of gingerbread dark cake with dried apple filling between each one. The cardamom a warmth that arrived at the back of the throat a beat after you expected it. Opal watched Rena eat a piece and waited. "It's wonderful," Rena said. "The cardamom is exactly right." Opal sat back, satisfied. She was a compact, quick-moving woman in her early 30s with dark hair pinned up in a practical way that managed to look, on her, stylish anyway. She had the manner of someone who'd made peace with her circumstances and found the making of that peace more interesting than the circumstances themselves. She talked the way she moved, quick, efficient, with a laugh that arrived suddenly and left no residue. They talked through most of the morning. By the time the coffee pot made its 3rd round, Rena felt she'd known Opal Vance for considerably longer than 3 hours. It was Opal who brought up the rule. Not dramatically. She mentioned it the way you might mention a road being unpaved, a fact that shaped behavior without requiring elaboration. "Cleet get to you already?" she asked. "He did," Rena said. "The day I arrived?" "Well, he's not wrong." Rena looked at her. "You believe it." "I know it," Opal said. "There's a difference." She poured what was left of her coffee out on the grass. "You'll learn the difference." Rena waited for more. Opal didn't offer it. She folded the wax paper from the stack cake into a neat square and tucked it into her apron pocket. And that was that. Rena wanted to press, wanted to ask the obvious follow-up, the question that her education and her temperament both demanded. But something in the way Opal had said, "I know," it stopped her. Not a wall. More like a fresh wound. A thing that could be touched, but not without cost. She filed the question away. The WPA interviewer arrived in October of 1938 with a government-issue notebook, a portable typewriter he assembled on Cleet Maynard's kitchen table, and the particular brand of studied neutrality that the Works Progress Administration had instructed its field workers to maintain when collecting Appalachian oral histories. Record what you hear. Do not editorialize in the primary text. Do not condescend, and do not be condescended to. His name doesn't appear in the surviving documents. The field reports from McDowell County's WPA project were archived in Charleston, and what survived, the 1953 archive fire, came through in fragments. What we have is 5 testimonies, hand-typed, and the interviewer's marginal notes. He talked to Cleet first, then to a woman named Bertie Combs, then to 3 others whose names are partially legible in the surviving documents. The surnames are Vance, Maynard, and what appears to be Salyer. 5 accounts, collected over 2 days. He typed them up the second evening, sitting at that kitchen table while the oil lamp threw shadows up the wall. And he wrote his notation at the bottom of the last page in a hand that, if you look at the archive photograph long enough, you can read as careful rather than urgent. Consistent across all 5. No collaboration detected. Recommend follow-up. No follow-up was conducted. The 5 accounts varied in how they described the experience, but converged, without any apparent coordination, on 3 specific observations. First, the road, walked after full dark, deposits the walker further into the hollow rather than closer to the entrance, regardless of direction walked. Second, sounds from deeper in the hollow arrive at the ear before sounds from the entrance, as though the air inside the hollow is conducting differently than the air outside. Third, the distances inside the hollow at night are wrong in a way that everyone interviewed struggled to describe, but described almost identically as feeling like a room that keeps being rearranged. Cleet told the interviewer, "I walked out that road in full dark one time in 1921. Walked for 2 hours. Came out at the Salt Lick. The Salt Lick is a 1/4 mile from my house. I walked for 2 hours in one direction and ended up a 1/4 mile from where I started." The interviewer wrote in the margin, "Subject appears completely calm. No effect suggesting performance or embellishment. Bertie Combs told him she'd learned the rule from her grandmother, who'd learned it from hers. She couldn't say how far back it went. She said, 'It ain't something that happened once. It's something that is.'" The interviewer asked Bertie Combs if she was frightened of the hollow. Frightened? She considered this. "I'm not frightened of my kitchen either. I know what to do in my kitchen. I know not to put my hand in the fire. Same thing." He wrote in the margin, "She means this literally. This is not resignation. This is methodology." Rena was not interviewed. She'd arrived 2 years after the WPA project passed through McDowell County. But she was there when the interviewer came, and she watched him work through the Maynard kitchen window from across the fence, and she felt, in a way she didn't entirely like, that she was watching someone do something she should be doing herself. She was a person who believed in documentation, in empiricism, in the power of observed fact. She just hadn't observed any facts yet that she was ready to write down. October deepened. The hollow's trees let go of their leaves in an order that seemed to have nothing to do with species. The sourwoods went first, then the hickories, then the white oaks, in a sequence that the residents seemed to expect and Rena could find no botanical explanation for. The school's 6 students became 7 when a Maynard cousin arrived from a place up the road. She taught them reading, arithmetic, state history, and the basics of geography. She found them quick, practical, and largely uninterested in anything that didn't have a direct application to their lives, which she came to understand was not a failure of curiosity but a refinement of it. They knew things she didn't. One of the Maynard boys could identify weather 2 days out by the smell of the creek. He was 9. She and Opal developed the easy rhythm of close friendship, visiting on Sunday afternoons, trading books, cooking things together in Opal's larger kitchen. Opal's husband worked in the mines near Welch, 3 weeks out of 4, and was the kind of absent presence around which a life organizes itself. Opal didn't seem diminished by his absence. She seemed, if anything, most fully herself on the Sundays. Her husband wasn't home. They talked about everything. Rena's opinions on Steinbeck, Opal's opinions on everyone in the hollow, delivered with affection and surgical accuracy. The price of flour, Roosevelt, the school board in Welch, whether the creek was running higher this fall than last. They did not talk about the rule, not directly. Rena had the discipline not to push, but she noticed things. The way the hollow's rhythm organized itself around the sundown hour. Not urgently, not with fear, but with the automatic certainty of a tide. By 4:30, everyone was inside. Not because anyone had said so, because everyone knew. The way bodies know to step over a threshold without being told where the threshold is. Rena stayed inside too, not because she believed it, because she wasn't ready to test it alone. She watched the road from her window sometimes, not every night, but some nights, when she woke at 2 or 3 in the morning to get water, she would stand at the window and look out, and the distances would be wrong, and she would stand there for a long time, not naming what she was looking at. The air smelled different at night. In the daylight, the hollow smelled like creek water and wood smoke and the particular sweetness of leaf decay, which is not an unpleasant smell, but a rich one, the smell of something becoming something else. At night, underneath all of it, something else arrived. Cool, stone cold, the smell of depth, of enclosed rock, of the inside of a place that didn't have outside. Like a cave, except there was no cave. Like the air itself had a basement you couldn't get to. She noted this in her journal without interpretation, just the smell changes at night. Cold, like rock. It was January of 1938, 4 months into her tenure, the Hollow's worst winter month, when the mountains blocked what weak winter sun there was from reaching the Hollow floor until past 11 in the morning. That Opal said, one Sunday afternoon, with the fire going and the sleet coming sidewise at the windows, "You want to know what happened to me?" Rena looked up from her book. "You've been not asking for 4 months," Opal said. "I figured I'd save us both the trouble of you working up to it." "Only if you want to," Rena said. "I don't," Opal said, "but I'm going to." Sarkt. She set down her mending. She looked at the fire. The gap in her front teeth was visible when she breathed, just barely, just the way a door shows light under it when the room beyond is lit. She had a way of going still before she said hard things, a full-body stillness like a dog hearing something before you can. "I was 17, she said. "It was August. My mother was sick and I needed to get to the Combs place for a remedy she'd asked for. The Combs place is at the entrance. I figured I'd walk out quick and walk back. 20 minutes. She stopped. "It was past dark when I left," she said. "I knew better. I walked out anyway." Rena waited. "I walked for an hour," Opal said. "I could see the entrance. I could see the gap in the mountains. I could see the sky lighter where the gap was. I walked toward it for an hour and I didn't get any closer." "You turned around?" Rena said. "Turned around. Came back to my starting point." She smoothed her apron with one hand, a flat, mechanical gesture. "I tried again, walked faster, same thing." A full hour and the entrance was the same distance away. "And the third time," Rena said, because Opal had gone quiet in a way that had weight to it. "The third time I ran." The fire cracked. Sleet hit the window. "I ran," Opal said, "and I didn't end up at the entrance. I ended up somewhere else. A clearing I'd never seen. I'd lived in this hollow my whole life, and I had never seen that clearing." She looked at the fire. There were stones arranged in a circle, old stones covered in moss. Not placed recent. Placed a long time ago, or put there by something other than recent. Rena kept still. "I heard something," Opal said. From behind me, my own voice. The word sat in the room. My voice. My actual voice, the sound of it saying, "Come back inside, you're already here." The fire popped. Opal smoothed her apron again. "I got down on my hands and knees," she said. "I don't know why. It felt right to be low. And I crawled. I crawled until the sky started getting light. And I found the road and I followed it to my house. I went inside. I never told anyone." She picked her mending back up. I'm telling you now because you've got a mind that isn't going to leave this alone, and I'd rather you have the truth than spend your time testing something that's going to hurt you. Rena said. What do you think it is? Opal pulled a thread through. I think it folds, she said. Like paper. The inside gets bigger at night. You can't walk out because there's more inside than there used to be. The entrance doesn't move. There's just more distance between you and it. And the voice. Opal didn't look up from her mending. What's in the extra space, I can't say. I only heard it the once. That was enough. She bit the thread off with her back teeth. I go inside at dark, she said. I've been inside at dark every night since I was 17. I intend to keep doing that until I'm dead. Rena walked home through the sleet. The cold got into the wool of her coat, into the skin of her wrists, where the sleeves ended, into the soft place behind her ears, where the cold always found her first. She stood on her porch for a moment before going in. The road lay before her in the dark. It was fully dark now, 4 o'clock dark, January hollow dark, and it was wrong in the way she'd stopped trying to name. The distances were wrong. The sounds were wrong, arriving from the wrong directions. The cold air smelled like depth, like enclosed stone, like a room with more inside it than should fit. She went in. She locked the door, which she'd never done before. She sat at her table and did not open her journal. There is a quality to that WPA interviewer's marginalia that I keep coming back to. Consistent across all 5. No collaboration detected. He was a government employee, a man with a typewriter and a methodology, and presumably a train to catch back to Charleston. He wasn't there to validate. He was there to document. And he documented 5 accounts of the same impossible thing, verified their independence, and wrote 4 words of recommendation that nobody followed. Recommend follow-up. Think about what it took to write that. Not the writing itself. 4 words is nothing. But the acknowledgement, the admission in the margins of a federal document that what he had collected was worth taking seriously, that a trained interviewer assigned to record Appalachian folklore had heard 5 separate people describe the same spatial impossibility in such close alignment that he could not attribute it to story swapping or community mythology. He wrote no collaboration detected because he'd checked. He'd interviewed them separately, in different houses, on different days of his 2-day visit. The accounts matched on the 3 specific points without matching word for word, which is exactly the pattern you see in genuine independent witness accounts, and almost never in stories that have been passed around until everyone's saying the same thing. He understood what he had, he wrote it down. He went home. The archive fire in 1953 got most of it. What survived is the fragment, with those 5 summaries, those marginal notes, a partial cover page. The recommendation for follow-up, which was never followed, survived, which is either ironic or not, depending on how you think about the things that get preserved and the things that don't. By the spring of 1939, Rena Justice had stopped arguing with herself about what she'd seen from her window on those winter nights. Not because she'd accepted it, because she'd identified the argument as the wrong argument. The question was not whether the distances were wrong. She had eyes, she had a ruler. She'd measured the oak one Saturday afternoon, and it was 94 feet from her window. And on 2 separate nights, she'd watched it move through distances that had nothing to do with 94 feet. The question was not whether. The The question was what? She was a school teacher in a one-room school with 6 students and then 7. She had access to Welch's Carnegie Library, which she visited on the 3 Saturdays a year when she had occasion to go to Welch, and could plan her trip to arrive before dark and return before dark. She read everything she could find about spatial anomalies, about electromagnetic phenomena, about the history of similar reports in similar geography. She read about magnetic hills, about places where light bends, about the handful of documented cases of what some researchers called topological irregularities, places where the observable distances didn't match the measured ones. None of it fit exactly. The hollow wasn't magnetic. The light didn't bend in any way she'd identified. It wasn't a mirage. Mirages are visual illusions, and what happened in Bone Holler was also sonic, also tactile. The air thickening after dark in a way she could feel against her skin, like pushing through water that wasn't water. The cold stone smell, the wrong echoes. She thought about what Opal had said. It folds. The inside gets bigger. There was a word for what Opal was describing, though Opal hadn't used it. Topology. The mathematics of shape and space. Specifically, the mathematics of shapes whose interiors could differ from their apparent exteriors. A Klein bottle, a Mobius strip. Spaces that violated the intuitive assumption that inside and outside are stable, predictable categories. She wasn't a mathematician. She was a school teacher with a ruler and a Carnegie Library card. But she thought, if the space inside the hollow folds at night, if the geometry rearranges, if the interior becomes larger relative to the exterior, then walking toward the entrance while the folding is happening would be like walking toward a door that keeps moving. Not because the door moves, because the floor between you and the door keeps generating new floor. You walk. The distance doesn't close. And if you run, she thought, if you run and cover more distance than the folding can generate, you end up somewhere you weren't supposed to reach. A clearing, stones in a circle, old. Her voice from behind her. She closed the book she'd been reading. A textbook on non-Euclidean geometry she'd borrowed from the Carnegie Library on what felt increasingly like a pretense of professional research, and looked out the window at the road in the late afternoon light. The road was calm. The distances were correct. The oak was 94 feet away. Everything was fine in the daylight. Spring became summer, became fall in the hollow. The way seasons do in a place that notices them. Not as dates on a calendar, but as shifts in what the world smells like, sounds like, costs to move through. Rena's students grew by an inch. Opal's husband came home for a stretch of 6 weeks and was good-humored about it. The creek ran high in May and lower in August. The sourwoods went first, then the hickories, then the white oaks. Rena extended her sense of the hollow's geography the way she'd extended her understanding of the rule, incrementally, empirically, with a level of caution that she would have found excessive in herself 2 years prior and now found simply practical. She mapped the hollow on paper one Sunday afternoon. All 11 houses, the church, the school, the creek, the salt lick at the center. She marked the entrance where the road came through the gap. She noted the distances, measured or estimated, between landmarks. She measured the road's full length by walking it on a clear November Saturday and counting her steps. The hollow ran approximately 3/4 of a mile from entrance to back wall, the widest point no more than 400 yards across. She looked at her map. 3/4 of a mile by 400 yards at its widest. She could walk the whole thing in 20 minutes. She thought. Opal walked for an hour and ended up a 1/4 mile from her starting point. Opal ran and ended up in a clearing that didn't exist on any map. A clearing with stones arranged in a circle. She looked at her map. There was no clearing on her map. No open space large enough for a stone circle in the part of the hollow where Opal had described ending up. The back wall there was steep, solid ridge, scrub oak, no clearing. In the daylight there was no clearing. She folded the map. She put it in the back of her journal and did not take it out again. It was Cleet who taught her the practical aspects of the rule, though he didn't present it as teaching, and she didn't present herself as learning. It happened over the course of many months, through conversations that were ostensibly about other things. The school stove's flue, which needed attention, the price of coal, the coming of winter, the habits of the deer that came down into the salt lick in the early morning. Cleet was a man who communicated most efficiently on a slant. And Rena, after enough time in the hollow, had learned to listen on a slant in return. He told her eventually all of it. The rule had been in the hollow longer than anyone could trace. His grandfather had known it as a fixed thing. His great-uncle had once described walking out after dark and coming home 2 hours later, having moved 1/2 mile. The rule was not new. The hollow was not new. Whatever the hollow was had been doing this before the Maynards came here, before the Vances came here, before anyone white came here, and likely before anyone at all. And the hollow had been doing it with a regularity and a consistency that made it, in Cleet's view, as reliable as weather, not good or bad, just a condition of the place. "The mine," Rena said one afternoon in the spring of 1940, sitting on his porch. "You worked underground for, 20 years? 23, and it never, the distances underground, they were normal underground," Cleet said. He thought about it. Normal everywhere except here. He looked down the road. "I used to think it was the mountains, the way they close in, made the air do something. But I worked mines under worse mountains and it was fine." "What do you think it is?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I think it's the hollow itself," he said finally. "Not what's in it. The hollow, the shape of it. Like it's got a shape at night that it doesn't have in the day." He looked at his hands. His knuckles were the knuckles of a man who'd moved rock for 2 decades, enlarged at the joints, permanently marked with the fine dark lines of coal dust that doesn't entirely wash out. "I told my father once," he said, "when I was about 12, that I thought the hollow was like a folded thing, like a sheet folded up, bigger when it's open." What did he say? He said yes, and he said so. Rena looked at the road. "So we don't leave after dark," she said. "That's the whole of it," Cleet said. She tried it in October of 1941, not recklessly, not impulsively. She'd been in the hollow for 5 years by then, and she'd watched the rule function, and she'd thought about it for long enough that she'd stopped finding the thinking useful and started finding the testing necessary. She was 31 years old. She understood by now, in the way you understand something that has lived in your peripheral vision long enough to stop being peripheral. She understood that the rule was real and the hollow was real, and what happened after dark was not folklore. But she'd been a scientist before she'd been a believer, and she wanted to know where the edge was. She told herself she wasn't going to walk the road. She was going to walk to the entrance, just to the entrance, to see where exactly the change happened. She told herself this on a Thursday in October, watching the sky from her school window, while her students worked on their sums. She watched the angle of the light. She calculated. If she left at 5:15, she'd have the 15 minutes of thin dusk light to make it to the entrance and back before full dark. The entrance was half a mile. She could cover half a mile in 12 minutes at a walking pace, which left her 3 minutes of margin. She told herself this was careful. She believed herself. She left at 5:15. The road was fine at first. Still the daylight road, the ordinary road, the road she'd walked 100 times. The sourwoods on either side had gone to red, and the evening air smelled of creek and leaf decay and the first cold edge that October puts in the air, the smell of approaching dark, not yet dark. She walked quickly. The entrance was visible at the far end of the road, the gap in the mountains framing a wedge of pale sky. She was making good time. She was at the midpoint. She was certain of it. She counted her steps. When the sky went, not gradually, the mountains took the last light like a door shutting, and the hollow was in full dark in the space of 3 minutes, and she felt the air change against her skin, felt the thickening she'd been noting in her journal for 5 years, the pressing quality, like depth, like descent. She took 10 more steps. She stopped. She turned around. Her school was behind her, not ahead, behind. She'd walked half a mile toward the entrance, and the school, which was 200 yards from her house, which was 3/8 of a mile from the entrance, was behind her at a distance that she put at perhaps 50 yards. She was not closer to the entrance. She was deeper in. She stood in the dark road and did not run, because she knew from Opal's account what running produced. And she stood there and breathed the cold stone smell of the air, thick with the pressure of whatever the hollow became at night, and she heard something from further in. Not words, not animal sounds, something rhythmic and low, like a repetition, like a pattern, like children singing a song she didn't know in a language she didn't speak. Her hands were shaking. She heard the sound of Cleet's uneven footsteps. She could recognize his gait by now, the rhythmic lurch of his one shorter leg on gravel. Before she saw his lamp. He came around the bend in the road at a tilt, the lamp swinging, and he saw her and stopped. She watched him take stock of where she was, relative to where she should have been. "Rena," he said. "I know," she said. "Give me your arm." She gave him her arm, which she would not have let herself do 6 months prior. He turned her around, which was toward her school, which was in the wrong direction relative to the entrance, which was the right direction now, and walked her back. His lamp made a small, specific circle of light. The sounds from further in the hollow continued and then stopped, the way a sound stops when whatever's making it notices it's being listened to. He walked her to her door. "It keeps what it catches," he said. "I told you." "You told me," she said. She had no argument. She had no alternative interpretation. She had 10 steps and a school that should have been behind her in front of her, and she had sounds in the dark that she was not going to put in her journal because writing them down felt like giving them a kind of permanence she wasn't ready to offer. "Go inside," Cleet said. She went inside. She bolted the door. She sat at her table. She thought, "I have a map of this hollow and I know its measurements, and the school was behind me, and I had walked toward the entrance and the school was behind me." She didn't sleep. In the morning, when the light came back and the distances corrected themselves and the cold stone smell was gone from the air, she walked to the entrance. She counted her steps. She turned around. Her school was ahead of her in the direction she'd come from, at the correct distance. The road was just a road. She stood at the entrance for a long time. She looked at the gap in the mountains. She looked at the road going in. She went back inside. She stayed in Bone Holler for another 10 years. She stayed because, and this is worth sitting with because it says something about how a place works on you. She stopped thinking of herself as someone who was waiting to leave. The hollow became hers in the way that places become yours, not through ownership, but through accumulation. She knew which of the Maynard children would need extra work on fractions and which already had an intuitive grasp of numbers that she was careful not to blunt with instruction. She knew the creeks sound in different weathers, the way the sour woods went red before everything else, the particular quality of the hollow's morning light. She knew Opal's laugh and Cleet's certainty and the smell of the air at night. She stayed inside after dark. Not out of fear exactly. Fear had been part of it, that October night in 1941, when she'd stood in the dark road with the school behind her and her hands shaking. But fear wears down with time, even when the thing causing it doesn't go away, the way a stone's edge smooths with water. What replaced it wasn't acceptance either. She never stopped finding the hollow wrong in the specific, unsettling way that a room feels wrong when you know something has moved in it that you can't identify. What replaced the fear was something closer to regard. The hollow had a nature. She'd been foolish to think her understanding of that nature would change it. You don't change the nature of a place by understanding it. You just stop being surprised. She went home to Welch in 1948. Her mother was ailing, and then her mother died, and there were things to attend to that kept her away for 3 months. And when she came back to Bone Holler, the sour woods were already red, and she had a feeling coming down the road into the hollow of returning rather than arriving, which is a different feeling and a better one. She left for good in 1951. She'd been offered a position at a school in Bluefield, a real school, 12 classrooms, indoor plumbing, a salary that would change her circumstances materially. She took it. She left in March, and she left in the morning, and she left with Opal standing at the road and Cleet at his fence line, and 5 of her students grown past her classroom now, watching her drive out. She didn't look back, because she knew what looking back felt like in that hollow, and she didn't want to find out if the road would do it in daylight too. She arrived in Bluefield, where distances were what they should be, and the air at night smelled of other people's cook fires and nothing else. And she thought about Bone Holler every day for the rest of her life, which was a long life. And she thought about it without horror and without longing and with the particular clarity that comes from having known something true that you could never adequately explain. She thought about the stones in the circle that she'd never seen, and Opal's voice from behind the darkness, and the children singing from further in than any child could be. And she thought about the topology of a space that is bigger on the inside than the outside and what might live in the extra room. And she thought these thoughts in the ordinary light of ordinary distances. And she was glad for the ordinary light, and she never found it as uncomplicated as people who hadn't been to the hollow found it. 8 months after Rena Justice left, in November of 1951, Ida Sparks drove into Bone Holler at 6 in the evening. I want you to hold that in your mind for a moment. Because here's what you know now that you didn't know at the start. You know what the hollow is. You know what the rule is. You know why the rule is. You know that everyone in Bone Holler knew, with the kind of knowing that is indistinguishable from fact, that the road changes after dark, that the inside becomes larger than the outside, that walking out deposits you further in. Ida Sparks did not know any of this. She was 43 years old, a school teacher from Welch, which is where Rena had come from, though they hadn't known each other. And she'd been assigned to replace the Bone Holler School's instructor, who'd retired. She had a 1948 Ford, dark green and bobbed hair, and the particular brand of impatience with local peculiarity that is not cruelty, not contempt, just a calibrated certainty that the world works the same way everywhere if you look at it right. She'd driven up the day before to meet with Cleet, who was still the closest thing Bone Holler had to an official representative, to discuss the school arrangement. She'd met with him. She'd been polite. She'd driven out before dark without issue and felt confirmed in her sense of the hollow as an ordinary place. On November 13th, she drove back in at 6 in the evening with the intention of spending the night in the Dillard place, which had been kept for school teachers, and beginning work the following morning. Cleet met her at the road. He was standing there, which he never did without reason. And he'd been waiting, because he'd known she was coming, and he'd done the arithmetic of her likely arrival time and found the numbers alarming. "Miss Sparks," he said, "Mr. Maynard." She had the engine idling, window down, a travel case on the back seat. "I'm just getting in. Long drive." "It is," he said. "You're not going to want to drive out tonight once you're settled." "I'm not planning to drive out," she said. "I'm staying." "Good," he said. "Stay, and when you're settled, leave the car alone." She looked at him. She had the expression of a woman who'd already cataloged him under a specific heading, which was not the worst heading available, but it was a heading that meant she was no longer fully listening. "I'll be fine, Mr. Maynard." "You will be," he said, "if you stay inside." "I always stay inside," she said pleasantly, and put the car in gear. He watched her go. He stood at the road entrance for a long moment. Then he went inside, because there was nothing else he could do, and he sat in his kitchen, and he waited. She settled into the Dillard place. She made a meal. She went through the school's records. She wrote a letter. She was, by her own later account, though later meant something complicated given what followed in Harm's, comfortable. The hollow was quiet. The mountains were visible in the dark beyond her window, the ridge line black against a sky with some stars in it. She'd noticed, she said, that the distances outside looked a little odd, but she'd put it down to the dark and the unfamiliarity of the place. At 9 o'clock, she realized she'd left her lesson planner in the car. The car was 50 feet from the door. She thought nothing of it. She put on her coat. She went out. She was gone by the time she reached the car. Not literally. Not in an instant. That's not how the hollow works. She retrieved her planner. She turned back toward the house. The house was not where she'd left it. Further. The 50 feet had become something else. She walked toward it. The distance didn't close the way distances close. She walked faster. She was a rational woman, and she told herself, "I'm disoriented. The dark is throwing me. The house is there. Just keep walking." She kept walking. The house did not get closer. She walked, and she walked, and the air thickened against her skin in a way she had no category for, and the darkness smelled like cold rock and no cook fire and nothing human, and she kept walking toward the light in the window of the Dillard place, which stayed exactly as far away as it had been when she'd stepped off the porch. And then she was not walking toward the house anymore because she'd turned, or the road had turned her, or something had shifted in the geometry of the dark, and she was walking in a different direction without deciding to walk in a different direction. She walked for she did not know how long. The cold stone smell was all around her. The sounds were wrong. Arriving from places, sounds couldn't come from at angles sounds don't take. She could feel the air against her face, thick, the pressure of it, the sense of inside, of descent, of a space with more room in it than the outside of the space would allow. She walked. The road kept going. It just kept going. On the third morning, Hobie Rakes found her sitting against a sourwood tree, 2 miles past the road's end, in a part of the hollow where the map said there was nothing but ridge and scrub. Her shoes were clean. She had her lesson planner in her hands. She was looking at something in the middle distance that wasn't there. She didn't know who found her. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know that 72 hours had passed, and she would never know what those 72 hours contained, and she never tried to find out, which is a decision I find worth pausing on. Most people, waking up with 3 days missing, would want to know. They'd push. They'd try to excavate the lost time. Ida Sparks made a deliberate choice not to. I think she knew that what she'd find, if she looked, was not something her categories could hold. And she was a practical woman. She kept the categories she had. She kept them intact and functional. And she went back to Welch, and she never drove after sunset again. Not anywhere. Not once. Hobie asked her later, and much later, when she'd been back in Welch for 2 weeks, and she'd agreed to a brief conversation with the county sheriff who was trying to file a report. What she remembered. She said, the road going. The air being thick and cold. Not being afraid, which she said was the strangest part. Not being afraid even though the thing was clearly impossible, just walking towards something. The sense of something patient and vast in the dark around her, not threatening, just present, the way a mountain is present, the way an underground space is present. When you're inside it, the weight of the space itself. The sheriff asked her if she'd seen anyone. She said no. He asked if she'd heard anyone. She paused for a long time. No, she said. She'd paused too long. He noted it. He didn't follow up. No follow-up was conducted. I don't know what Bone Holler is. I want to be clear about that. I've read the WPA fragments. I've read the county records. I've corresponded with a geologist at WVU who told me the mineral content of that part of McDowell County was unremarkable. The terrain was unremarkable. There was nothing in the geology that would produce anything like what 5 independent witnesses described to a government interviewer in 1938. There's no scientific framework I can put it in that doesn't break the framework. What I know is this: the road goes in. In the daylight, the road comes out. At night, something happens to the interior of that space. Something happens to the geometry, to the distance between points, to the relationship between inside and outside. And the hollow becomes bigger than it is, more inside than outside. The entrance stays where it is. The space between you and the entrance grows. And in the extra space, in the room that appears at night when the hollow folds open, something waits. I don't know what. I'm not going to tell you what, because I don't know. And the people who got closest to knowing, Opal at 17, Rena in that October dark, Ida across 3 vanished days, they came back knowing only the feel of it, the patience of it, the sense of something vast and still that had been there long before the Maynards and the Vances and the Justices and the Sparkses, long before the name, long before the road was cut through the gap. Ida Sparks lived another 40 years. She died in Welch in 1991 at the age of 83. Opal Vance stayed in Bone Holler until it emptied, which it did slowly through the 60s and 70s as the mines declined and the young people left for places with more options, which is a thing that happened to 100 hollows in McDowell County and was its own kind of loss. Clete Maynard died in the hollow in 1958, in his own bed, in winter. Rena Justice, I found her through the Mercer County records, taught school in Bluefield until 1974 and died in 1986. Her journal, if she kept one, through all those years, has not surfaced. The WPA interviewer's name remains unknown. His recommendation was never acted on. The hollow itself is still there. The road is paved now. County maintenance does it, has done it since the late 60s. Most of the houses are gone, collapsed, or reclaimed by the growth the mountains push out every spring. The church still stands, barely. The school is gone. The creek still runs. A county road sign at the entrance reads, "No Through Road," which is accurate in the ordinary sense. Underneath it, someone has scratched a message into the green metal with something sharp. A knife, a key, the point of a rock. The letters are uneven, cut by hand by someone who pressed hard enough to go through the paint, to the metal beneath. Not after dark. I've thought about who scratched that, whether it was someone who knew the history, who'd heard it from their grandparents, who understood it as the history it is, a community's rational adaptation to an irrational fact. The long inheritance of Clete's certainty and Opal's crawl home through the dark, and Rena's 10 steps and the school appearing behind her where it should not be, or whether it was someone who didn't know the history at all and just knew the rule, just had the rule, the way you have a rule that was handed to you before you were old enough to question it, the way a hollow passes its knowledge down. Either way, the scratching is there. Either way, someone pressed hard enough to go through the paint. I think about Ida Sparks most of all. I think about the 3 days she spent in the fold, in whatever room opens up inside the hollow at night, the room that is larger than the hollow itself, the room with the patience and the stillness and the sour wood trees and the sounds she wouldn't account for. And I think about her coming out of it, sitting upright against a tree with her lesson planner in her hands, the way you come out of a long sleep, the way you come out of a place you can't carry back with you. She never drove after sunset, not anywhere, not once. 40 years of that. 40 years of arriving where you need to be before the dark comes, of watching your departure time with the particular attention of someone who knows exactly what it costs to miscalculate. 40 years of other people finding this eccentric, finding it charming or pitiful or simply inexplicable, and not explaining it because what she'd experienced had no words that would fit inside another person's understanding, and she was not going to pour it into the wrong shape just to make someone else comfortable. She knew. She simply knew, in the way that Clete knew, and Opal knew, and Rena had slowly, unwillingly come to know. The hollow keeps what it catches. The road goes in. At night, it folds. The inside becomes larger than the outside. The distance to the entrance grows and grows, and the entrance doesn't move, and you can walk toward it for an hour and arrive a quarter mile from where you started. You can run and end up somewhere the map says isn't there. And in that somewhere, in that extra space, in that room that appears when the geometry opens, something is patient. It waded through the Vances and the Maynards. It waded through the surveys and the WPA interviews and the sheriff's report that was filed and closed. It waded through Rena's 5 years and Ida's 3 days, and the long, slow exodus of the 60s and 70s, when the hollow emptied and the houses fell and the church roof caved in one winter under a load of snow. It waded through the paving of the road and the posting of the county sign. It is waiting now. The sign says no through road. Underneath, the scratched letters. There is no one left in Bone Holler to enforce the rule. There hasn't been for 30 years. What remains is the sign and the scratching and the mountains on 3 sides and the single road in and the dark that comes early because the mountains are close and the fold that happens when the dark is full and whatever has always lived in the extra space, patient as a stone, patient as depth, patient as the inside of a place that has always been larger than it looks. The road goes in. It doesn't go out the same way. Not after dark, not ever, not once.